Hello, hello, fellow waking dreamers. Welcome. I think just for a moment, giving some people some time to join. Um, let's talk about a little bit about paradox and the big paradox of life. Really, um, is really interesting because we tend to, there's been this theme of, for me anyways, recently of trying to follow the pulse of now, trying to follow the pulse of what feels most resonant for me to do right now, um, or whether I'm meant to not do so much and things like that. There's this balancing act there. Um, and more, it's a paradox of wanting to accomplish certain things, but also not wanting to get really wrapped up in how to do that. It's kind of a backwards way of thinking, really, a totally completely irrational way of going with it. Essentially, just not really making plans for how you want things to go, just doing whatever feels right. But I've been doing that, and it's been going well for me so far. I'm gonna keep it up, and I'll let you guys know how that goes. But I have a feeling that the things that need to be done get done sort of automagically, as the source begins to feel it is now the waking dreamer in the dream it's dreaming. We become lucid and more. We're less interested in following like a prepared thought paradigm of some kind, because we know that the dreamer in us that's dreaming all of this has like a much more inspired thought about what could be done next. So that's where our inspiration starts to really bloom. And it's essentially how all these topics that we talk about here come about as well. I don't really think much about them. I sort of just say, hey, what are we, what's good, right? I don't know. So I don't like prepare topics in advance. I scribble some stuff down sometimes if I feel like there are steps. Like in this one that we're talking about today, there's some steps. And actually, I wrote this little description out. And as usual, if you have anything, questions, drop them in the comments, chat, things that are going on. This stream might be a little like annoying at some parts, but try to bear with me. There are some things that I'll be saying that the ego in us will resist a lot, and I'm going to try and make that as delicate as possible. But what we're talking about is shadow work, and some of the stuff that I'm going to go into are going to probably bring up like, oh, I actually do this pattern or whatever. And that's sort of the intention of it. But also the intention of it is to be not shaming anything like that. We're not talking about shaming ourselves. We're noticing some of our own traps that we get ourselves into in this like kind of healing or expanding journey into more wakefulness, more awareness of now as well, is a byproduct of this work. Because the sort of the shadow are masks in many ways that we wear of story in different ways. And that story anchors us into time and anchors us into our narrative experience, and makes us feel more directly involved, very invested in each little happening around us that relates to that particular mask or shadow. And so I'm going to go into that a little bit more. But first, I wanted to just read the description, because I wrote it out and it like some cool stuff just sort of flew out of my hands, and it's probably worth reading. So shadow work has at its core perhaps the most important foundation of what working on the inner self. Shadow work has at its core perhaps the most important foundation of working on the inner self, which is that of inner contemplative study of oneself and honest and thorough review of the pains which may be said to rest within one's being. Today we'll discuss the unraveling process of shadow and move into the realms of inner discovery that can lead us becoming trapped there or dormant in recycling through shadow. We do not shame ourselves, we simply seek to find the patterning which is rooted in addiction to the safety provided by our mind, believing the foundational safety thought, which is I know what to expect now. I have seen this before. It is this core thought which the seeker will notice permeates into all things, the projection of one's opinion of past experience into the now and future. It is the predictive nature of the mind to attempt to anticipate by recognizing patterns as the animal aspect of us, the body or the beast, survived by analyzing the external environment and placing value upon all external things to sustain itself, seeking always and ever out, never in, until it elevates into the solar plexus and a soul takes residence to claim I am. It is at this moment that the shadow begins forming, as the spark of awareness of the soul must cast upon itself a shadow of veil in this particular logos to ensure the evolving being becomes a mind-body-spirit complex, meaning perceiving complexity instead of the singleness of the one. So, yeah, I guess I ended up sort of just channeling when I started writing that, which was cool. And it really describes pretty deeply, I think, what the shadow is and why that's there. The shadow is essentially also the veil of separation. Like, it's the veil that keeps us from not really fully knowing what's going on. It's the veil that exists. It's like this, the concept that we're limited is our shadow, essentially. And so it's this paradox of healing. It's this constant paradox that can get us sort of trapped in things as well. So in truth, it's very simple. I am as God created me. I'm a perfect image of God. At the core of my being exists a spark of divinity that the technical term for it is Christ, but it doesn't matter what we call this. We just call this a spark of divinity. The spark of the Creator resides within us. That is the truth of what we are. So anything that is not that is not true, right? So we know that. Yet, my experience is that I seem to be upset quite a lot more, right? Things seem to bother me. So this doesn't make sense, right? And it's kind of confusing. But that's the whole paradox. We're both perfect yet also seemingly fragmented. Now, this fragmentation that we experience persists until we unify with Source, many billions of years in like linear time from this moment. But we have a part of us that's already there as well. So that's the spark that rests within, that's already there also. So we're there, but we seem to be being hurt by things as well. Or we seem to have past things that bothered us happen, abuse, whatever it was, and that remains in our field now. We still have reminders of it, and it's uncomfortable and hurts us or feels sad somehow. And essentially what we're wanting to try and notice is when we're recycling these traumas, because that's where the trap comes in. Shadow work is the probably it's where the deepest treasures of yourself lay. It's where that self-contemplative, honest review of where all the pains come from, going as deep as we can, is where we find our biggest releases, and then informs us to hold more of the light we actually are in truth. So it's what we're essentially doing is removing little, you could call them just sort of barriers or blockages in our various crystalline centers, energy centers. And we're removing those blockages which distort and don't allow the proper light of I am to shine from that chakra, from that energy center. That's what the shadow work is, metaphysically speaking. But in our experience, what happens is the shadow manifests into these masks that we wear, both to external people, but also internally to ourselves. Something like, a big barrier, for example, that I had to get past was when I started making YouTube videos years ago. I was very nervous I grew up in a family that was very, my parents seemed to put a lot of importance or value in like how people saw us, not so much what the truth of the matter was, just what it appeared like to others. So my dad would often talk about like the optics of the situation, right? And so I always wanted to be careful about how I looked to people. And then when I came onto YouTube, I'm like, oh, I'm going to look stupid, or I'm going to look like an idiot, or I'm a grown man. I wanted to play video games at the time. So I'm like, this is like silly, immature. People are going to think I'm dumb, whatever it was, all these different things. So you can see that there's this mask I'm wearing to myself that I'm putting on and basically being my own enemy. I'm letting my persona be my ego be my enemy here, my adversary, Satan. If we're speaking in more biblical terms, Satan is being my adversary, which is myself, right? I've made it all up, basically, because the environment stimulated me to believe this thing about it being important, what people think about me or something, what people perceive me as, and trying to maintain some certain type of image because I was a certain age or whatever it was. I could barely even remember my own logic for it. So, so that's one way that we can know we're doing well in shadow work in a certain area is like something that used to limit us. We now don't barely even understand what we were thinking. Like it's just kind of silly, right? But if like I was still, like for example, a really good example is somebody approaches me and becomes my friend, and then they say something to me, let's say, and it brings up in me another experience I had with other friends that have said similar things and meant them very maliciously and stuff. And I basically feel all that coming up and mistakenly think they're doing it again, right? I just sort of presume it's happening again and I get it wrong. Or, maybe it is happening again, but it's the same thing. And all of that pain that then from the other experiences boils up and gets thrown at this other person. Or maybe it doesn't, but internally we feel that way. We feel like, oh, they're such a jerk for being this way. Why would they say that this way or whatever it is? And we might react to it. All of that's okay, but if that sort of is keeping happening, and then we go into we have those realizations, we let all the feelings come up and we feel everything, but we don't go to the core of it to notice that, like, even back then when that person was saying these things, I had already, like, that's where I was forgetting myself. I was forgetting what I am in truth all the way back then. Basically try to notice that already I was forgetting, and I didn't have to listen to those people back then. I don't have to listen to this person now. And it seems that after maybe speaking with them, they're like not even doing the same thing. It's just seemed like that to you. Like that's what tends to happen, is it just seems like this person is about to try and abuse me somehow or manipulate me or just whatever it is. But if you see the truth, then you're not really able to be manipulated. And you're also like, if you're in your core and center, then what's the difference what they're trying to do, right? Like what they're trying to do isn't super relevant to anything. There's things in life we have control over and things in life that we don't. Excuse me, I got like heartburn a little bit again. Whew. There's things we have control over and things that we don't. And like the heartburn, I don't have control over when the body does things. And I've been eating a whole bunch of Triscuits, so that's probably what it is. But there's things we have control over and things we don't. And if we don't have control over it, we're not able to really like do anything about it. Then like for example, somebody saying things to us, what they say, how they say things, like our control rests in just what of our presence do we really give them then? Like if the way they keep acting is like not great for us, then don't we just maybe not give them that much of us anymore? Like It's those types of things. But we'll have our shadows come in and say, oh, well, if we step away from that, then we'll be alone, and all these other things too. And so we end up like building these multi-layered shadow complexes of relationship and things, where we have multiple ways that we're limiting ourselves and feeling like we have to do this or that because we've limited ourselves some way. We want to try and notice those things, but then also give ourselves space to let go of them appropriately, like whatever that feels like. And so I wanted to go through just the steps that I'd recommend, like that we try to follow. This is what I've found effective and what I've seen effectiveness with others. So basically, we're not going to be like, someone attacked me, someone's hurt me. It's, I seem to feel like I've been hurt here. I seem to feel like something's happened here that's upset me. I seem to be upset. I seem to be sad. I seem to be angry, whatever it is. And we say that we're going to sit with this and ask God to sit with me. Basically, maybe that for us involves us sitting and speaking with God about what's just happened, like kind of venting a bit. Letting some of this feelings out, or doing what I had talked about before in writing little poems or things like that, get those feelings out. And then we want to like affirm that we're going to drink fully of the cup offered, not like we're going to participate in crappy experiences that we can clearly just turn away from, but I'm going to feel all the feelings. I'm going to drink the cup offered. I'm going to feel everything here. I'm asking God to just be with me while I do that, having faith that it's going to just be fine, because the ego resists pain, right? The ego resists some of that stuff. It wants you to have a certain amount of pain, but it doesn't really want you to get introspective about the pain either, and like allowing the pain. So it's this little tightrope or boundary that the ego tries to keep putting in, where we kind of try to avoid our emotional pain as if it's a threat to us. Like it's over usually in between 60 to 90 seconds. And then it's basically gone. And a lot of times we can find ourselves even just happy after, because we feel so much lighter. And then so we just remind ourselves that what we said in the beginning, the truth of what we are: I am as God created me, and God's well pleased with his creation, or her creation, however we frame that. But we're reminding ourselves of that first. And that we remind ourselves that the thing that seemed to upset me is not right now. Like, it's not happening right now. We're safe, right? We're at peace. We're secure in our knowing of what we are in truth. So we're more grounded into ourselves. And then we just let the belief go. Like, we look at what the belief was that inspired us to feel somehow out of ease. Usually it's something in a relationship. Someone has said something or done something. That's not always the case, but it's usually something with other people, right? Generally. Of course, not always. But the belief is usually founded in something in separation that implies that something did something to you, and it's denying the infinite being that you are. It's sort of denying it's limiting you, making you be this limited, wounded being, instead of affirming what is true, which is that you're a divine being and that the world doesn't have power over you. That's the truth of it. And the soul wants us to know that, which is why things get so uncomfortable the more we deny that in different areas, especially when we're on content like this and we know the truth, we know it, and we deny it again and again in different areas. And it gets worse and worse. It kind of gets repeating. And so as it recycles, that's the trick. Oh, I've seen this before. Every time this comes up in relationships, I'm reminded of like how my mother used to speak with me, or how my brother used to do this, or whatever it is, how my friend said this to me one time. And it's coming up over and over again, and I'm feeling all the feelings, but it just keeps coming up in my experience. It's because we're not dismantling the belief that somehow what happened in the experience has an effect on you as a being. Like, that somehow the experience detracts or devalues you somehow, or makes you less than whole or less than good, or something like that, which isn't true. And it's going to keep coming because, karmically speaking, there's recognition that has to happen to convert that experience into light and exalt that. And then what happens is, because you've done that, the patterns that used to trigger it just aren't seen anymore. So either they'll stop happening to you at all, or they'll still happen, but it doesn't make a difference because you don't even notice it. Like, there's so many times people are like literally making fun of me to my face and doing things that I realize usually later. I'm like, I think they're making fun of me, but it's like totally oblivious to it. And even to the point of, like, I'll tell someone something that is true, and then they'll respond with a bunch of opinions about things, or even an opinion about me. So as if like what I just said isn't true because they just say their opinion about me or something, right? Like, so then I just kind of look at them and I'm sort of like, what I said was true, and what you said is just an opinion. So like, we're not even having the same conversation, right? I don't even know what's happening here, really. Like, I'm aware that they're just trying to attack things that aren't real, instead of just looking at what the truth of the matter is. But I don't know what else to say. Just sort of like, I can try to bridge if I feel like I have the energy, but I'm not sure why I was getting all into that. Oh, because these things just don't bug us. Like, they don't have any meaning. This person's opinion of me, or of whatever spiritual concept or whatever metaphysics that I just said to them, or whatever it was, whatever their opinion of it all is not really like relevant to anything. It's not really, it doesn't matter what people's opinions are. I've said this a few times, but it only matters what meaning we've given to our own opinion and the opinions of others that seems to have any bearing on us. And we don't have to give value to other people's opinions, unless their opinions are the law. Then we should probably adhere to those opinions if we want to stay free. But, you know, and then the easiest thing that we want to do after that, after the trigger and all the stuff, we have to try to find the gratitude in it. Like, can we find gratitude? What did we learn out of it, maybe? Like, if we can't find gratitude in, like, if it's a specific, if it's a specific person, we may be able to see back and look back at things that person's done that have helped us find gratitude for that being, which can help us have the oomph to forgive. Be like, they're not all horrible, right? Now that's not always possible. That's not always easy for us. So if it's not easy for us, then that's okay. But we want to notice that, like, at least we learned stuff, and we can help remember that they helped us learn it. Even if the way they did it was kind of horrible, they helped us, right? Let's try to give them a bit of credit instead of just attacking them. And it's not for their sake even, it's because it helps us to move through the shadow of it. It helps us to release the wounding and to forgive, find the gratitude, and uplift all of it, which, you know, it's confronting to the part of us that feels hurt, very confronting to it. So it's like, you know, it's a pain to even sort of, if we don't feel that we can forgive someone, then we're probably not ready to do that work. But that means we'll probably also start to experience very similar stuff that person did, or we'll have reminders of it. because the soul usually is calling to forgive, which is why it keeps coming up. If the soul is not calling to forgive, it'll usually just kind of sit idle. It'll sit pretty idle and won't get triggered into your awareness so much because the soul's just not working at that right now. It's not on that lesson yet. And that's why it just sits dormant. This is one of the reasons too that like I've pretty much cleared myself up, and then bloop, something massive just pops into your life and you're like, holy shit, I didn't realize I was still all messed up. And that's the funny thing about it all, is that that's the trap of it, is that so many spiritual teachers and people that call themselves light workers and things, and they're sort of starting to get very prideful about their shadow work, right? Like very and it's okay, but I guess pride goeth before the fall. Like if we're uplifting the shadow work, which is essentially illusion work, this is about going into spooky things or hard things that aren't actually hard, right? Like the purpose of the shadow work is to stop doing it, right? At some point, right? That's the purpose of it, is to stop doing it. So we don't want to like glorify it, really, even though it is where all the treasure's held. But we'll also notice that the same shadow comes up, but when we have new perspectives. So we have a new perspective, and then a similar thing comes up. It's like testing our new level of consciousness at a similar type of experience that we had in the past, because there's a lingering bit of stuff there, because there's usually layers to these shadows. So we have similar stuff come back at us when we're at a higher consciousness, and we're like, this again? Like, that's kind of weird. And then basically, it's a little test to see how we do. How do we do with our new consciousness at this similar test, similar thing? And how fast are we able to notice what's going on and then deal with it and come to peace in ourselves? Really, what we do in the situation isn't really what matters. It's really our intentions and our ability to stay centered in ourselves while handling the stimuli or the catalyst. And it gets to a place where the shadow still exists, but the being is centered. So they still sort of get accosted by the karma and the shadow that's accumulated. They still kind of get hit with it. But it doesn't, it's like oil off of a duck's, or water off a duck's back sort of thing, because the being's centered. So, if we become awake and quite aware, it doesn't just stop all of that happening. It doesn't necessarily mean we've cleaned up all of that stuff. So the stuff starts to get thrown at us a bit, especially because the awareness gets greater. So we start to experience more of it, like more sensitivity to it as well. We're unable to not see basically how manipulative people are and how, all that stuff. And we have to try to figure out how to love everyone just with so much fervor that we can't contain ourselves. Like even when they're being mean, like, wow, look at that beautiful, weird meanie. Like trying to get to sort of that space. And usually I can hold that pretty well, usually. Yeah, usually. So, but it's hard with people like my children, because I have these roles, most of our roles get built up with a lot of shadow in them. Like a lot of confused little notions and paradigms that we bring into our roles, like parenting, for example, is a big one, because we learn most of our parenting from being parented. And then we have to try to discard what we think is not ideal and build these new ways. But we often end up building ways based on our own limitations as well. So we do this in so many areas. One can quickly see that there's a lot to come up. However, we can get very, very, very good at almost instantly just transmuting it, like as if it's nothing. Because we go through the steps that I outlined just so quickly. It's like oh yeah, that was a thing. It's not really meaningful to us anymore. because we're not swayed emotionally really from our centered too much, from our centered sort of presence. That's, I think, the goal, right? And that's the trap, though, of the shadow work thing. The trap we get in usually is that we're not correcting the belief. So we're like investigating what's happened and all this, but we're not actually correcting our belief about ourselves. Reminding ourselves, trying to put a new belief in there, trying to basically remind ourselves that no, that limited thing I thought I was is not true. Remember? Yeah, that's not true. Remember? Basically reprogramming our own mind. It's hard because we are told almost all over the world all day long that we need XYZ to be good and healthy. Even just going on social media for half of a second, you're going to see advertisements to increase your fitness, increase your whatever, be better, be gooder, be specialer, right? I'm just making up words and stuff. But you'll see it literally everywhere because the entire race is obsessed with themselves that way. Their individual self. And it's, for many of us, it's a little disturbing, but it's also something that still often gets into our subconscious. Even people that are not super into that stuff, unless we correct the belief, literally, like we have to basically be able to look at all that stuff and be like, that stuff's all meaningless stuff. And that will start to help us to free us from all these weird burdens that we had. And most of them were just like literally planted in by society, just by us living in it. We're products of our environment until we realize no, that all was like a conditioned response to stimuli. That's all that was. That was just I was a dream character living the dream. Now I'm awake in the dream, I'm lucid. And all that stuff was not it was a nightmare maybe. It was like, but now I'm awake and I can fix that. The way I fix it is by realizing it never even really happened. Like it was a nightmare and it's over. So I don't have to perpetuate any of the dark feelings that stay with me because now I'm not having that nightmare. So it's my job now to disassemble the nightmare or help just raise it up, exalt it to a divine thing. That nightmare taught me a lot of stuff in a lot of wacky ways. Isn't it just amazing how the universe managed to teach me all this about myself? It's an honor, really. That's how I felt when I had sort of that experience, that I realized that everything was sort of a nightmare, and that actually like I'm still sort of living in a half nightmare world. Really, it's like hell here, pretty much. But there's so much beauty as well that it's, the consciousness doesn't have to dip into the hell frequencies. So I don't see any of that really. Like when I see the news or something, I just, the humans are doing stuff. Like it's almost meaningless to me. I hope that the souls that need aid get their aid. And if I see ways to help them, then I do, of course. So it's not like totally detached, like it's not real, I don't care. It's more like I love them. People are generally quite intense with each other. And also the news and stuff is mostly just made up fear stuff. So, who even knows what's going on if it's on if it's on the news? Who knows, right? And it's all good. I mean, it makes no difference, but it's we can still have compassion for all of these things because it's other children the same as us. Just some are still in the nightmare. Some are just coming awake, like yawning, right? And some are like wide-eyed, like wide awake, but like still in shock psychosis. I call this spiritual psychosis. Just shock at what they're seeing and confused at how to even be in this world, hearing voices and whatever's going on. Getting wrapped up into weird wormholes of fear and sort of psychotic or paranoid type behaviors, it's very normal. It's very normal to get sucked into that stuff. Very normal. Because there's so much stuff out there to suck us into it. And if we get sucked into it, there's probably something that we're looking to heal in ourselves in there. something that's like core to us somehow. So yeah, I think that was it. And now I'll just go to the comments and see if anyone's in the chat. Jody says, got here late. We'll watch the replay. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Jody. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions about anything I've said or anything about shadow work or anything else that we want to talk about by any chance? And if not, then we shall call it a day. But either way, I really appreciate you guys spending your time. And hopefully everything I said sort of made some sense. You know, the shadow is sort of a frustrating thing to talk about for us generally. And, you know, all of our, like I said before, all of our roles that we play, the characters that we play, all are essentially these shadows that we wear. So when we're pretending to be like teacher, for example, like we're wearing this constructed garment of essentially a veil of illusion or shadow. It's not a real thing that we're doing. We're like pretending something for a bit to do a thing with consciousness as source, experiencing itself as a teacher in that moment. That's really more truly what's happening. So, you know, it's important to be able to notice all of these archetypes that we have, notice where they might be weird, limited, like things that are inhibiting our soul's more true expression in the different archetypes. So like we're all a teacher sometimes, and we're all a student sometimes, and we're all the fool sometimes, and the hermit sometimes, right? So when I'm a hermit, do I also like take just drugs all day to cope with my feelings, and I'm still in my hermit phase? But when I'm in that phase, do I tend to like binge on like some type of drug, or do I like just eat tons of ice cream or whatever it is? It's all sort of the same thing of coping. That would indicate that like that part of me that's isolating, like doesn't know how to healthily isolate. So this is where like mastery really comes in, is when we're noticing that in depth about all of the roles that we're playing. Each role tends to have like a shadow aspect, and then we're trying to build all these pure roles, and that all aligns in sort of, you could say the Christ or the master soul, the master of the soul, perhaps the higher self. When all of this is really aligned, you're essentially the higher self in form now. When you can on a command or on a dime move into very pure, all pure sort of divine expressions of the archetypes. So yeah, that's it. Kay, love you. Bye. Super late. We'll listen back. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Love you all. Thank you for your time. Hope you guys all have an amazing day. And, you know, keep on keeping on and all that stuff. All right. Take care.